So let's start talking about teaching this important history, this moment. For the folks who are on the call with us, the attendees, please start to jump in. All righty, because we need to make sure that we are thinking about the classroom and the curriculum components to this, the curricular components. Um, as we think about teaching this, Eric and Alberto,
Mm-hmm.
what should teachers be including? What are some of the key topics? And we don't have to be very specific. We can drill down in a second, but give us some big umbrella themes that need to come out in the classroom.
Well, I think, I think what needs to be considered is a collective and almost a series of events that were interconnected and that really highlighted at the time what the community needed, and so and how identifying the issues in the community, how engaging folks in the community can lead to change, right? And to positive change for the advancement of folks in higher education and in the K to 12 arena as well, because what we have to understand is that bilingual education was also a contentious topic during that time. Housing, the events at Allen Bradley, right? The March on Milwaukee. I mean, there's a conversion of different things, and so when we think about creating curriculum and creating these things, it's good. It will be important for students to understand, that rich history and how all those pieces lead to the Chapman takeover and to the things that were formalized after the takeover, right? It didn't ended with that takeover. It took months of negotiation. CELA was very instrumental in equipping themselves with knowledge, equipping themselves with advisory from lawyers, understanding that the university had dollars allocated for these types of programs, but we're not acting on that, and so it's through good organization and looking into what others had done previously that they're able to craft a well thought out plan and eventually acting on that plan to really let the folks know on campus that they understood that the UWM was created as an urban institution to serve the community around it, and they were not living up to that mission that the university has. And so I think there's a number of elements, and so definitely enough enough content to develop a multi-semester or a whole educational program to educate folks on activism during that period of time.
Yeah, Eric, what you got? You out there in the streets? You in your car right now? Talk to us.
Yeah. So yeah, I totally agree 100% with all the points Alberto is making, and then on top of that, I always like to emphasize how like history is a living, breathing thing, and how today is directly connected to yesterday. So I feel like any sort of programming that's discussing the Chapman Hall takeover should always be connected right back to what is going on today and our more recent past. And for example, here in the south side of Milwaukee, everyone knows about Voces de la Frontera and their youth organization. Yes, Youth Empowered in the Struggle. And there was a UWM chapter for Youth Empowered in the Struggle that split off and became independent at one point because they were having conflicts with the leadership at Voces. And that organization, the dear friends of mine, they're called the Young People's Resistance Committee, YPRC, no longer around, but they did a lot of organizing on campus while I was there, and a lot of organizing in the community, especially when we saw the beginning of the detention centers, not the beginning, but an escalation of these detention centers what we would call, prison camps of undocumented children. So I feel like we should tie it back to the movement in the streets today, always, and make sure that that's being acknowledged, and the influence of these actions, right? The reverberations of how something that happened so long ago can create these reverberations that are still felt in the street today. And it's very easy to see these photos on a wall and feel alienated and distant from it, but it's always so much closer than we think.
I have one question that I think really is at the heart of what drives us to create these kinds of digital modules for our young people, and this is about identity development. Can you gentlemen talk just a little bit about the importance of sharing these kinds of rich cultural histories and the ways in which these histories positively impact the identity development of our young people? Why are these histories so important?
For a number of reasons. The vast majority, or a big chunk of the Latino population, and other groups as well, it's immigrants, and oftentimes and when you look at the history of Latinos in Milwaukee since 1920, growing probably the most in 1950, 1970. I think the natural thing for communities of immigrants is to come together and to see the needs and trying to fill those needs. And so I think that's part of that development of a community, not just as an individual, but me personally, I'm a product of the center. I benefited for 6+ years of the Spanish speaking outreach in the early 90s. And it was through my interactions with the center that I credit my formation as an individual, right? Not only they provided, firsthand services, but they connected me to other networks that were crucial to my development as a student, as an individual, as someone who perhaps was trying to find its way in a community, right? Did not know who to go to, did not know who to talk to, did not know where resources lived. And so I think when we talk about young people today, understanding this history, and understanding what it stood for and what it stands for today, it could do the same thing, right? Could really, aspirationally speaking, give a student the motivation and the aspiration to say, you know what, I'm going to go to college because this was done for me. This was laid out for me, and this was the effort that took place to lay out this for me. So that's how I sort of internalize my experience going through the SSOI as a young immigrant coming from Puerto Rico to Milwaukee, understanding the value of my elders, understanding the value of people who put their name and their bodies on the line to provide a platform for me to thrive. And so I think those pieces are key when we think about mentors, when we talk about the formation of a community and an individual.
Thanks. Eric, you want to jump in? What are some of your thoughts about the importance of these sort of culturally specific kinds of curricula?
I think it's extremely important because we deal with such a twisted narrative around our communities. And, there's all this talk of, we're stealing jobs, we're criminals. And, the reality is that we're just members of the community, family members, just like anybody else. And it's also important that even though we are immigrants, and a lot of people do have a lot to lose by stepping out and taking action and raising their voice. There's a lot of context of repression in our home countries, a very violent state repression for any sort of action like this, right? But I think it's important to teach about this content, put out these images and sounds and vibes, just so people know that, que no tenemos miedo, we're not afraid. There is fear, but the courage is way stronger than the fear. And if you see these type of images and feel the emotion behind it, then that inspires people to action today. And you know, there's a lot of people in Milwaukee that put a lot on the line, just like you were saying, by stepping in the street, raising their voices today. There's a lot of state repression still, a lot of repression from non-state actors, white supremacists out there targeting activists till this day. So I think it is important to put it out there, inspire young people to keep that energy going, keep the ball rolling, and always take it to a higher level. And one last piece as well, I do want to mention, I forgot to kind of touch on this, but you know, when we talk about Black and Brown solidarity, a lot of times it's almost seemed like the Latino community is one thing and the Black community is a whole nother thing. When in reality, we need to acknowledge our Afro-Latina and Afro-Latino brothers and sisters that were in the movement since day one, you know, both on the Puerto Rican side and the Mexican side, and from all other nationalities of the diaspora, and acknowledge that you know, the story is more complex than it has been told, right? And that that our Afro-Latina brothers and sisters have been there from the jump, from day one, and they're still in the streets today. And it's not, you know, it's not as easy as how a lot of people like to frame it, as these two completely separate communities at odds with each other.
You know, Eric, I have to share this with you. When I'm teaching about slavery, if I'm teaching about sort of that colonial moment, one of the things I often say to my classes is that I did not have a better understanding of the Black American experience until I became far more knowledgeable about the Black presence in Central and South America, the African presence in Central and South America and the Caribbean. That provided me a broader global understanding of words like African descendant, Latino, Hispanic, like the as you stated very clearly, the ways in which our histories intersect are critical. And if we don't get our kids to start to understand that, and adults too, we're missing out on some of the most vibrant histories and some of the vibrant sort of culturally identifying components to a global history than we could ever imagine. It is critical that we get our studies to that global awareness. Intersectionality, absolutely, David.
So I want to just respond to some of the stuff David's been putting down there, and just in general. So we're in the general Q&A part now. I had a chance last year to bring students from Carmen Northwest Campus and Carmen Southeast Campus together, and we spent time with both Jesus Salas and Fred Reed on that tour. So, and we talked about the history of Latinx activism in Milwaukee and the open housing marches to the same students who were both Black and brown within this context. And like, I could see really, I'll just say this first, how much we've let them down, in that the students were like hearing from Jesus Salas and they were like, I can't believe you exist. And like Fred Reed, they're like, I had no idea that there were legends from the city. You're here with us right now in this room. And it's so disorienting for them, right? Because like when they think of someone who's a freedom fighter, it's always someone far away. It's never from this city. So I think like that's one piece. But then, you know, I knew those kids felt really charged up in that moment. But my question then was, do they have anywhere to go with it? Is this going to be a discrete experience? It's, you know, it's not going to, you know, maybe one of them had a revelation, but then the question is that a discrete experience within their education? Or are there other things to undergird and support that, where they're not just, you know, having one good experience, learning, you know, if they do one of these modules feeling like, oh, that was cool, but then is it being continued through the rest of their education, right? Is it just kind of an island that gets lost in the ocean of the rest of the core curricula? So